ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the bit of mix-up in the arrangement. But those who are going on the study tour are now preparing themselves to go. So I take it that, you want to be part of this, next session. The idea was that we had the option of also having a parallel session looking essentially at some aspect of ombudsman work. And we want to do that in two main formats. Part of what we wanted to do in this program is to highlight the work of specialty institutions. And because the big growth area in ombudsmanship is really how much of that has spread to different specialized institutions. And we increasingly are finding them in not only in big countries, but even relatively small countries like Bermuda, for instance, now have this institution. And the reason, of course, is that because of the highly specialized work that some of them do, it makes a lot of sense to have institutions like that can go into those details and at the same time do not necessarily burden the more broad-based ombudsman with the specialist role. And again, as we said, we try to capture some of them at the bottom of this backdrop. Tomorrow, hopefully, all the chairs will go off, and you will see some of the different specialized institutions that we have now. Perhaps the biggest of them is the UK Financial Ombudsman in the United Kingdom. Is the biggest of the specialized institution that handles usually between 250 to 500,000 complaints every year. And you can see with that the ombudsman is a huge enterprise because you do require a lot of managerial and organizational effectiveness to be able to capture and do that level of work as effectively. The other interesting part of it is that people who usually have specialized problems, also in many ways, are very, very anxious people. So if your money, for instance, you have challenges with the bank, you can barely have the patience for anyone to drag you on indefinitely in getting your money back. In the UK, we also have one of the leading ones, which Rob Bryan heads, the Health Services Ombudsman. The Health Services Ombudsman is also one that, in many ways, have become one of the most significant institutions. But what the UK have done is to couple a specialized function with a general purpose ombudsman. And that's quite a very unique approach to it. The specialized work of the ombudsman is really handling complaints in the National Health Service. And the National Health Service, as you probably know, is the biggest public service in the United Kingdom that runs into billions of pounds every year. So what we thought we could do, and we were quite fortunate to get that, we were expecting one of the specialized ombudsmen in New Zealand to attend, but at last minute she couldn't. So she had sent us a video that actually discusses what she does as a utility ombudsman, and that's a fairly, interesting one. And what they've done there, which of course we also now find semblance of in the United Kingdom, is that ombudsmen are not all anymore entirely governmental institutions. You can actually now essentially deliver them using market arrangement. So you do have ombudsmen that, in fact, are actually limited companies. And they provide a service, they provide an ombudsman service, but essentially using a market model. And the utility one in the in New Zealand is one of those. In the United Kingdom, we have similar institutions like the institutions we have for the funeral, for instance. We have a funeral ombudsman in the United Kingdom. We also have, an ombudsman also for energy. And quite a lot of what they do is using models that are essentially outside of government. This is important because in countries like Africa, the perception is that you cannot find more efficient ways to run the institution unless you get budget from government. And there is now enough appreciation of the fact that there are options, and you can run this institution much more efficiently than we see in many of our countries in Africa. In Africa, the specialized ombudsman is growing as well. And we now, South Africa is leading this sector, and they now have quite a few of the specialized institutions, the university, they have institutions for bank and financial services, and of course they have the military, and the rest of us are trying to follow that line. Mauritius also now has a children ombudsman, and we do also know that I think Senegal has also now set up an institution, I think essentially for the commercials, for financial services. So we thought that we could use this program to introduce and promote this area of this development, and hopefully it will provide an opportunity for even policymakers, who are not here unfortunately, to appreciate what is happening. So if you agree with me, I would suggest we listen to the two videos, and thereafter we can then engage in some discussion around what they do, as well as how some of the things they are saying can apply to us. And we would link that up specifically to issues around how the ombudsman may better handle complaints. We are quite far behind, so we essentially are working with a time frame of about an hour and a half. So that doesn't give us much time, but we'll see what we can do. I wonder if that is fine with you, ladies and gentlemen. So, okay, so we listen to the first one on the utility ombudsman, and then.
Greetings from New Zealand. I'm Nanette Moreau, the Utilities Disputes Commissioner for New Zealand. I really would have loved to have been with you today in person, but unfortunately I can't be, but I'm glad that I can speak with you through this medium. I'd like to spend a little bit of time today just talking about utilities disputes and what we do, and also to talk a little bit about the challenges of being an industry-based ombudsman scheme. Just to talk a little bit about us, we provide a free and independent dispute resolution service for the utility industries, and they include things like the electricity, gas, the water and broadband complaints. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. To do our work, we use a wide range of dispute resolution skills, including mediation and conciliation. Our staff, our conciliators, are trained mediators, and they're accredited through an educational process. About 90 to 95% of our complaints are settled through the work that the team does, and we're really proud of that. We've got a team of about 30 in total, about 20 of those are people who are working specifically on the conciliation and mediation cases, and then the rest are the support admin services. As I say, our conciliators are trained both in mediation and conciliation, and we really try to focus on best practice alternative dispute resolution. Our process is that we have conciliators who actually deal with the two parties, so the companies and the complainants, who would be electricity users or gas users or users of water services. And through using things like three-way conversations, they try to resolve the issues with the parties. If that's not successful through a kind of early conciliation process, we conduct an investigation and get all of the detailed information about what's happened through the complaint, and all the while actually working with the parties to try and get settlement. If that doesn't work, though, and ultimately the parties cannot reach an agreement, I can make a decision, and the process for my decision making is that I first issue a preliminary decision. As part of natural justice, the parties have an opportunity to respond to what I say in my decisions, so my findings, and then based on the information that they provide back to me, the feedback, I then can issue a final decision. And that final decision is binding on our providers, our companies, if the complainant accepts my final decision. And that can be put through a court process to make it a binding decision. As I say, most of what we do is actually resolved, and that really pleases me, because I think the best kind of solution that can be reached is one that is agreed to by the parties, and giving them the control that they have in order to actually deal with it. One of the things that I think is really important in the expo that you're being involved with is what are the challenges for ombudsman schemes, and in particular I can speak to the industry-based ombudsman schemes. One of the really interesting things, and I've been working in this area now for 17 years, is the whole issue of independence. And I always refer to it as walking a bit of a tightrope, because you've got parties on either side who are really trying to get you to go in their particular direction. But our staff are really clear, and I'm really clear, that we're not an advocate for either side. What we're looking for are the facts of the case, and we take those facts and try and come to an independent decision or independent settlement. I think one of the big things with that is that oftentimes companies will say to us that we're just in the pocket of the of the complainant, whereas the complainants are saying, because we're funded ultimately by the industry, that we're in the pockets of the companies. So it is really that fine balance of ensuring that you do have regard to all of the facts that are in front of you. A second challenge that I think we face on a day-to-day basis is fairness. And some of the things that are really critical with fairness, of course, is that we are fair, but we're also seen to be fair. So it's not just enough to feel in yourself that you're fair, but those that are participating in the dispute resolution process have to regard you as fair as well. In our organization, in utilities disputes, we have essentially an independent board. And so it's a board made up of 5 individuals with an independent chair and independent directors. And that has been a really helpful move that we've had, so that we can, with confidence, say to the people who are using our services that we're governed by an independent organization or independent body, and that the commissioner, in my decision making, I'm also independent of the board. So in my role as commissioner or ombudsman, I make my decisions independent of the board, and they can't interfere with that. And I think that's really critical in all organizations of this kind. Another thing that's really important to us, of course, is awareness, and that's people knowing about the fact that they can come to us. So it's got to be easy to use. It's got to be accessible, and we work really hard with trying to ensure that where perhaps there are language difficulties or physical difficulties, that we can respond to that. So we do use things like Language Line. If people speak other languages, the materials that we provide, some of them are basic complaint information is in 11 different languages. And so we do try to ensure that we are accessible. We do promote access. We've just recently released an awareness campaign. And if you're interested, you can look at it on our website. We also do not charge. So I'll talk in a moment about our benchmarks, but there shouldn't be any cost barriers to getting to our complaint process. So it's free to complainants. One of the things that we're seeing a lot of right now is a lot of disruption, particularly in the electricity industry, with a lot of new kinds of ways with solar and electric vehicles of people using energy and in particular, as I say, electricity. So one of the challenges really is to think about how we as an ombudsman scheme in this area remain relevant. If you've got a small community, say, that is producing their own energy, should they be required to be members of a scheme, of a dispute resolution scheme? And so we're working through the challenges of that. But what we want to, at the end of the day, make sure is that all consumers have access, if they do have issues with their electricity or their gas or their water or their broadband, that there is a place that they can come to. So there's a lot of industry and environmental change going on right now. I think one of the other issues that is quite challenging is recruiting staff, retaining them, and ensuring that they get the proper kind of professional development. As we all know, it's an expensive process to get people trained and up to speed, and it's quite hard if you get a lot of turnover and the kinds of, I know for our organization anyway, the kinds of training that we do is actually very marketable to other organizations. And so we really do want to make sure that we provide ongoing training that encourages and opportunities for our people to stay with us. I just want to drop back to fairness for a minute and just talk about what my scope for decision making is. So in the schemes that I oversee, when I'm making decisions, I have to consider what is fair and reasonable, having regard to a set of different criteria. And one of the challenges, I think, is trying to decide what is fair and reasonable in a particular circumstance. But the kinds of things that I look to for guidance, of course, are the facts of the case. I also look at things like good industry practice and relevant codes that exist within that industry, and rules of natural justice, of course. And also, I have to have regard to the law. And that's been quite a contentious kind of issue in terms of applying the law versus having regard to the law. So I do consider the law, I have regard to the law, but at the end of the day, my fair and reasonable jurisdiction kind of overarches the law as well. I mentioned that we had some benchmarks. These were the things, and our organization has been going since 2001, so we're coming up to 18 years old. But right from the very outset, we relied on a set of benchmarks that were created by the Australian government. And they're now called Key Principles for Industry-Based Customer Dispute Resolution. And if you're interested, we certainly can send you the links for that. They set out a series of 6 benchmarks, and they also set out the basic principle of the benchmark, what the purpose of it is, and then some key practices. And it's actually really quite a useful document when you're establishing your criteria for how your organization is going to work. So I would recommend those to you. Just looking quickly at the benchmarks then, there are 6 of them. The first one is accessibility, and we've talked a little bit about that, about things being free for consumers, that it be open and accessible and meet the needs of the people that are coming to the complaint process. I've talked about independence, and again, as I say, that's one of the really critical things in this role. I think one of the challenges is if you're a decision maker, it's likely that the decision is going to perhaps be in favor of one person but not in favor of the other. There's kind of the winners and losers. And so the interesting thing about that is trying to carry through the vision of being independent when you're going to have a winner perhaps and a loser. And so that's why I think relying on the facts, what are the facts, and sticking to that is really important. And trying to minimize being swayed by emotion and some of the other kind of things that could pull you away from taking the facts into account. Another benchmark is fairness, and we've talked a bit about that in some of the things that are required in order to keep that balance. Accountability is another one of our benchmarks. So I, as chief executive of this organization, am accountable to my board for the decisions that I make as chief executive. But as I said a few minutes ago, in terms of my actual decision making, I'm basically accountable ultimately to the courts, so that if I make a decision that is found to be judicially reviewable, where I've maybe erred in law, then ultimately the parties can take the decision to court, hopefully not necessarily me, but that can happen as well. And also the other 2 drivers, of course, with any kind of scheme like this are efficiency and effectiveness. So it's that balance again of trying to figure out how you can deliver good quality alternative dispute resolution and investigation where it's necessary, without kind of going through 2 years of discovery and all of that. I'll talk a little bit in a few moments about how long our cases take, but efficiency and effectiveness are constant things that we certainly do take into account. And we've got benchmarks, we have performance indicators around what is expected of the team and of me in terms of getting through our work. The other kind of foundation principle, as with any scheme of this type, of course, is natural justice, and ensuring that the parties have access to knowing what is being dealt with, that there are reasons for the outcome, and that they do have the opportunity to input into the process. In addition to kind of looking at complaints, there are some other things, and we've got a favorite tagline that we've developed over the last couple of years of prevent, educate, and resolve. And really over the last few years, we've tried to extend our focus to the prevent and educate and then resolve. So we don't just want to be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff after the complaint has occurred. What we really want to do is kind of be at the top of the cliff and kind of be maybe a bit of a gate to keep people from going over the side. And so the kinds of work that we're doing in the prevention area, we hold monthly what we call webinars. So these are hour-long focused discussions about particular aspects of either dispute resolution, so it could be on how you deal with particular kinds of disputes, or how you deal with difficult complainants, or how you try and reality test the parties to get to a settlement. And we also do webinars around industry information. So looking at trying to educate the industry in terms of how we would look at a complaint if it's say, a switching complaint, for example, where people have gone from one company to another company and it hasn't gone well, and they might, as a result of that, have received a high bill, where a back bill, or there may be a disconnection of their electricity or gas supply, just as examples. We have a number of resources that we use to try and assist with prevention, and it kind of overlaps with our education part of our tagline as well. So we have things like case notes, so those outline some of the features of particular cases that we've dealt with. We also produce practice notes for our providers, and we also have a number of fact sheets, and I'll talk a bit more about those. But again, these are on our website, and they cover a whole range. I think there's about 20 of them now, and they cover a whole range of issues around disconnections and supply and making a complaint. In the education space, we also do both internal and external training. In the internal training area, we do, as I said, want to make sure that our staff are really well equipped to deal with complaints. And we do a lot of work around best practice alternative dispute resolution. And of course, because we deal across so many industries, we also have to provide industry knowledge as well. We also do external training, and that's for our providers. And again, we look at trying to give education around best practice dispute resolution, and also trying to get them to better understand our processes and how we actually work together. And then, of course, the third part of our tagline, which is resolve, and again, that goes from trying to work right at first instance with getting the parties together on a teleconference and getting them to talk to one another, with the conciliator working with the two parties and reality testing through to a binding decision if it's required. One of the big challenges, and I don't know if you have this in the work that you do, is trying to determine what a complaint is. And it's one thing that over the 18 years that I've been with this organization, it's probably one of the more challenging things. That we use the ISO definition of what a complaint is. And so we say that it's an expression of dissatisfaction made to or about a provider where a response or a resolution is explicitly or implicitly expected. And what we find is a lot of the times our providers, our electricity companies and our gas companies and our water company, don't necessarily recognize something as being a complaint. And so they'll call it something like an inquiry, and they don't really get on the front foot to try and get it resolved with their consumer, and then it winds up coming to us after a period of time. And of course the parties are then maybe a bit more entrenched, and it makes it a bit more difficult to try and settle the complaint. So I think being really clear about what it is you can actually look at and what the jurisdiction of your role is, and making sure that that's really explained clearly to the people that you're serving and the people that come to you for decisions is extremely important. Just a little bit about the size of our organization. So as I said, we're roughly 30 people. We have approximately 344, it says on the thing. I think we're maybe up to around 350 now, providers and members. And as I said before, it covers things like electricity and gas, LPG, another form of gas, water, broadband, electric vehicle charging. Electric vehicles are becoming quite an important thing in New Zealand, and also installations and that of solar equipment, which again is another area that I think, is causing a lot of disruption in the electricity industry. Since 2002, we've handled about 75,000 total cases. I just thought I'd give you quickly an overview of our year-end numbers for our last financial year. So last year we handled over 7,000 total cases. Of those, 4,700 were inquiries, 2,400 were actual complaints. There were 313 cases that were accepted for consideration where we did a comprehensive investigation. And the average working days to close was about 44 days. So I just want to encourage you, if you are interested, to go to our website to look at the resources that we've got. We do have our brochures, as I say, that are in a number of different languages. We have about 20 fact sheets that cover a whole range of issues that we deal with, and they really talk about trying to explain what terms are and what we look at when we're looking into a complaint and how we actually can help, what our process is. And that's quite useful to be able to give to parties and to our providers to help them understand what it is we do. I mentioned before that we've got case notes. That sets out in an anonymized way, so it doesn't identify specifically the name of the complainant or the provider, but it does set out what happened in the complaint and then what the ultimate resolution was of that complaint. And that includes commissioner decisions as well. So I would like to invite you to get in touch with me if you have any questions as a result of anything that I've said today, and I'd be happy to liaise with you on that. I'd love to come and visit your country at some point in time, and if there's anything that I can do to assist with the establishment of a complaint process or an ombudsman scheme, please let me know. Also, as I said, I would encourage you to go to our website, www.utilitiesdisputes.co.nz. I should say .co.nz, I guess, and take advantage of the information that we've got there. I wish you all the best for the rest of your expo, and I look forward to hearing from you and perhaps at one day meeting you. Thank you very much.
Firstly, I'd like to...
I'm a private legal practitioner. I'd like to find out if these organizations and some of the ones you've mentioned, especially the ones that are privately led or run, how do you get the funding? 2, it would appear to me that some of the things she described here are some of the things that are next to what our regulators do, especially on complaints management schedule. For instance, if you look at the capital market, you have a complaint management schedule that is being handled by the SEC. If you look at the telecommunication, so a complaint management schedule. So are we saying that this schedule will be better handled if it is a standalone, or really, I really need clarification on this. Thank you. Really, you know, I have been if you look at the capital market, for instance, or even the telecommunications, where you have some disputes, in fact, even in the electricity sector, where you have the NEC, they have dispute resolution window for people who have disputes in the industry. And then, what is the essence of regulation? A regulator, one thing that a regulator does is that he knows about the industry. And when there are disputes in the industry, it can easily, resolve those disputes. I have had an opportunity when I was I was once at the tribunal here many years ago. We paid a visit to the UK Ombudsman. And what I asked you now is one of the questions I asked them. Because it would appear that the Ombudsman was a standalone. And then several disputes in the financial industry go to it, and it could get bogged down, rather than the sectoral disputes which we have in Nigeria. I would think that that one is the sectoral dispute management system appears to be working for us, rather than having a standalone. Where we have a standalone is where you have associations that are what you call the shareholders associations. They are like pressure groups. Yes, pressure groups. So that if you have problem in the industry and they get to know about it, they go to the AGMs, they bring up your problems, and they engage the regulators and things like that. So I guess, I haven't really, it's still a bit foggy in my mind. And that's the reason why I'm here, really. That's the reason why I'm here, to see how the Ombudsman can really play, apart from the Public Complaints Commission we have, how it has played in other countries, and how can we bring it in here now with the different sectors that we're seeing, the electricity sector, all the other sectors, without it essentially being with the regulator. So I've not seen my way clear on that.
Okay, all right. You have the answer to it?
Not an answer. I want to also comment on, in line with what he said. Honestly, I've had this feeling since yesterday that this whole process started, and I've been thinking. My name is Chidi Martins. I am from the Institute of Chartered Mediators and Conciliators, Nigeria. And of course, mediation and ombudsman, they are like 5 and 6 in terms of processes, and though there are some slight differences. But all I've been hearing since yesterday is like, we've been talking about the ombudsman as it relates to the public sector, just like you said. Ombudsman as it relates, government-appointed ombudsman. That's what we've been hearing from all over the countries. All the presenters have all told that line. And maybe because I'm not a government officer, I began asking myself, I said, aside from the sectoral ombudsman that we have, let's say telecom, oil and gas, banking, and all the rest, what is the role of the private sector? Or what is the synergy? Or can there be a synergy between the ombudsman and the private sector? Or just like he rightly said, I'm not sure I can get the right words now, but I'm looking at a situation. Is it possible to have private ombudsmen who are trained, certified by relevant bodies, who can practice as ombudsmen in various industries? After all, yes, PCC may be bogged down, and all the sectoral ombudsmen may be bogged down with loads of job, but I still believe that what gets to them remains an infinitesimal percentage of what the issues are. This is a country of 200 million and counting. There are cases that may never be heard. Is it possible to create a rule or to have a rule for private or let's say individual ombudsmen? Because the very first time I heard about this word ombudsman, somebody defined it to me as an agent or agency. So I'm beginning to look, all we'll be hearing probably is the agency. What about the agent?
Okay. I get, that's why this is what this is all about. The only thing, of course, that I think there is a bit of You seem to be both agreeing, but I think there's a tension between what both of you are saying. Because on the one hand, he seems not to appreciate why you will have, so-called standalone, what you've called standalone. And of course, you are now talking about proliferating the institution. In actual fact, the main purpose, one of the central goal of this expo, is to try and draw attention to the way in which the institution of ombudsmanship has grown in other sectors. And so it's really responding to what you are saying. And that's one of the things that the last presenter was talking about. The next one we're taking is the presenter on police. There is a police ombudsman here. Also the lady from Washington. She's a police ombudsman. And before you came, I think it must have been before you came in, I've encouraged everybody to take time and look at all the names that you have. The seats have been covering them up. And what we wanted to do with this was just pick up the different names of this institution. Let me tell you, and I think I've shared this with David, one of the things that motivated this expo for me was the incident with Professor Akindele in Ife. Akindele was my student when I was in Ife, brilliant student. Many of you know that story. That was the gentleman who was harassing a student and called her up and said she needs you, and she called her on her telephone several times and said, if you don't have sex with me 5 times, you wouldn't pass. And she really said it. And the girl was smart enough to record it. And then when she got fed up, she decided to make it viral. That, of course, Akindele is in jail now. The ICPC took him up and jailed him. And essentially what you are saying was what motivated this. Because all I asked myself was, there's a student who has lost out here, because I understand the student has had to leave the university because she couldn't stand it. And then there's also this other professor, brilliant man, good career. He's actually a church pastor, and his life career just got ruined simply because, he wasn't put under control. And it was clear to me that if you have an effective ombudsman system in universities, you will contain behaviors like this. So it's answering your question, that what was driving this was really, in so many different sectors, we're having them. So some of the ombudsmen you've had here are essentially the traditional one, as we call them. Like the Public Complaints Commission, the Ombudsman of Bermuda, and all that. These are the traditional. But since then, they've proliferated, and this is the example that we are trying to discuss here. So the answer to your question is yes. But remember, ombudsman is actually an institution. And the problem is when they come out and you talk about an ombudsman, people tend to confuse the individual with the fact that we are actually talking about an organization. So, and that's the other part of your response, that when you say, can we have, it's actually an organization that provides a particular service, a specialized service in complaint or grievance handling, but can then be located in any sector. The challenge is when government has to pay for all of them, it can weigh it down. And the answer we provided is that there are ways in which you can constitute them, and you then don't have to depend entirely on government, which is the other question you are raising. So you can actually deliver the function by using a private sector model. And one of the best illustrations of that, and that's also the system that is done here, and much of all the utilities, because the utilities is all the energy and all of that, is the housing, the estate ombudsman in the United Kingdom. It's actually essentially a privatized business. So what it does essentially is it has projected itself so much that you cannot be a legitimate estate agent in the United Kingdom if you are not part of the ombudsman scheme, which is again responding to it. So a scheme has been created, and institutions that want to be regarded and whose customers want to believe in are encouraged to join that scheme. So most times when you're looking for an estate agent, you're looking for an estate agent that belongs to the scheme. So that means if you want to be in that business, it's almost like an accreditation. You want to be part of that scheme. So how does the scheme then work once you are part of it? You pay like a membership. Then you also pay according to the number of complaints against you. So there is an amount charged for every complaint you have against you. So it's in your interest not to get too many complaints. But me as the manager of the ombudsman for estate, it's my business to look for as many complaints against you as I can get. And that's just the principle on which it works on. So you can't actually deliver it without having to weigh down government budget. So it's possible. But these are usually smart, relatively small schemes. They cannot be massive organizations like the Public Complaints Commission. And some of the way the PCC grew, likely because it's a government-owned institution. If it were a private or market-driven, it will not grow like that. So, and that's the point that is being made. So today, we have them in any sector you can possibly imagine. Any sector. So it can happen anywhere. But as I said, these are organizations. They are not individuals in that sense. But those organizations then employ people who do a whole range of different functions for them. They investigate for them. They do their PR. You know, some of them you found in the booth. A number of the people you found in the booth actually are not people who handle complaints. They are public relations people. They will have IT experts. They will also have lawyers who are not handling grievances but are providing advice. So a typical ombudsman, and David is here, he will confirm it, has a whole range of different specialties in it. So it's really a huge enterprise in that sense. So it's not just investigators. We talk about those who have to, profile the institution. Because if the institution does not have a good profile, nobody will take it seriously. It cannot be legitimate. And that's part of the issue also that we are hoping that the Expo will provide. So the answer to the question of all the colleagues is really to say, yes, there is some measure of overlap between what specialized dispute handling institutions do and what regulators do. But remember, there is nothing that the ombudsman does that cannot be handled in any other institution. So the issue here is not the fact that you have other institutions that can do things like it. That's not why we set up ombudsman. The reason why we set up ombudsman is that we want to create a specialized platform to be able to move quickly on individual grievances. So, and that poses the question differently. So the question is not about, is there something else? There is others. In fact, in some of the work that we have done, traditional rulers have been provided that function. And even till today, they still provide that function. And you also will find, we did some studies many years ago where we were able to show how during colonial times, there were people, individuals of repute in Nigerian societies who actually were performing ombudsman-like functions. Because they could be the only one that could speak the white man's English. And then, of course, they were respected, they could communicate. So when people had problems, they go to them. And then those people help to engage the colonial administration. So you can have it in so many different forms. But the point is not that you will not have other things being done or others that are not doing things like it. The question is, do you need an institution or an organization that can handle dispute in this sector in a speedy, fast, and specialized way? And you could look at around, there is no sector where that answer is not yes. The question then is, which is the best way and the best model for trying to do it? So my answer to both of you is, yes, it's possible, and that's why it's happening. The UK has one of the most elaborate financial ombudsman institutions in the world at the moment, the United Kingdom. probably has one. And in the United Kingdom, we probably have no less than about 35 different schemes. And these are different schemes, including in universities. We have scheme for funeral, as I said. We have a football ombudsman. We have a football ombudsman for housing and estate. We have ombudsman for financial services and the health sector. So we've created them. And of course, we have in utilities. And in the utility sector, they have them also broken down. And we don't see any reason why that cannot happen. But one final question, because I still need to go back to the next video, is also to make the point that we have a simple formula for determining how much grievances should happen in a particular society. And the formula is really to say that when you put 100 people together, about 14% of them will always have grievance. So if you calculate 14% of the Nigerian population, it will give you a sense of the number of complaints that you expect to be generated in this jurisdiction. And anyone can work that out. If you compare that to what the public complaints is handling, you will see the huge gap. So that answer essentially is a response to your question, that millions of people are suffering in silence. In the military, in the health sector, in utilities, in universities, everywhere. And there are no ways to respond. What we then also know is that when you do not have that, people cut corners. So because I know that my issue will not be handled and there's nothing reliable I can use, I will cut corners. And so ombudsmanship is actually the other side of corruption. So because when I start cutting corners, I have to look for ways around it. So the ombudsman provides a simple solution for you not to get to the problem of corruption in the first place. And that's what it's doing in some of these other societies. I don't know, sir, if I've answered the question. Eh? Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Tomorrow, you would also have opportunity to then look more into some of these issues and the challenges they also have. Because we are not in any way saying that running an ombudsman is simple business. It's not. You know, I knew David when he was a young man. He had no gray hair. He's grown all these years, still doing that business. So it can tell you how much go into it. So we're not suggesting that it's a simple thing to do. And that's why we are here and doing this discussion. But the central question that you've raised, which I think is worth answering, do you have effective mechanism in the society to deal with grievances and dispute, as you said? We try not to use dispute because dispute begin to suggest something that is more elaborate. A lot of things are simple grievances, very simple grievances that can really upset you, and you don't have anywhere to go, and you choose to suffer in silence. Do you have effective mechanism to do that? The answer to that for Nigeria is a capital no. Not only do you not have enough, you also do not have, even the ones that work are hardly efficient. And we do not want to wash the dirty linens of the Public Complaints Commission here. So that means the average Nigerian is in a bad shape in regards to grievance handling. You know, and as I said to you, a good example is what's happening in the university. You know, I'm an old man now, but I can go back 3 decades, 4 decades, that this problem had been there. That is now throwing up in our ears. UNILAG had another one recently, isn't it? Yes. Where no one can send their daughters to university and be safe that they will not be harassed. What kind of thing is that? If you have a simple system that guarantees that girls, boys will not have an alternative to go, simple, you will cut off that problem. And that's what the United Kingdom and other countries have done. South Africa had gone ahead now And it almost make it mandatory that every university must have an ombudsman. There must be an ombudsman office in every university. Remember, it's not just about harassment. It can be about grade. Some lecturers are lazy about marking, and then they mark badly, and then they force it on students, and you get away with it. Some of us were victims of that, and I can say that. I was not a lazy lecturer, but I know a lot of lecturers who have problems with that. Some don't come to classes. You've paid huge fee, but your lecturer is not showing up, and you have nowhere to go. So you can have so many problems like that, and simple systems like this help you to cut it off. So I would suggest, again, we have big problem in the police, for instance, in Nigeria and in many African countries. We also have a lot of concern in the military and in the security sectors. There are now a lot of military. In fact, there is now a dedicated institution for just, which is an association for military and armed forces ombudsmen around the world. And in fact, they are meeting right now I think in Sarajevo. They are actually having their meeting at this same week in Sarajevo. They bring together all those institutions that are dedicated just to the military. But I want us to listen to the police ombudsman of Northern Ireland and what she does and the way she also handles her work. Is it okay? Can we move on to the next one? Huh? All right. Can we listen?
Firstly, I'd like to thank the IOE for the opportunity to speak to you today about the role of the Police Ombudsman for Northern Ireland, about my role as a woman ombudsman, and also around ombudsman and human rights, because I think that's a very important part of an ombudsman's remit in the context of the IOE work in particular. So my name is Marie Anderson. I am the Police Ombudsman for Northern Ireland. I'm the fourth person to take up that role. The Police Ombudsman is a unique model in the ombudsman world. That is because it is not like the classic ombudsman model of a complainer or a person aggrieved going first to the public service provider or to the state institution and complaining first, and then going to the ombudsman at the end of that process. The Police Ombudsman's office is unique. All complaints about police in Northern Ireland come to my office and are investigated. I'm not a complaints reviewer, I'm a complaints investigator, and the importance of impartial and independent investigation of complaints about the police in Northern Ireland cannot be underestimated. One of my powers is to report and to make a public statement, and I think that's an important part of accountability for police in Northern Ireland. What do I investigate? Well, I investigate the conduct and the actions of all police officers. But I have another role which is quite significant in the context of human rights, and that is that I investigate the cases that relate to our troubled past, cases that emerge from events in the Troubles 1968 to 1998. And in that, I believe I perform an important role in bringing forth the truth about what happened then and also what the actions of police were. Many of the complainants in that context complain of collusion, and that is something that all previous ombudsmen in my role have commented on and have made public statements about, and I think that's important that we can reflect and bring truth to the past. But what about me as a woman leader? I've now held a number of significant high public profile roles. What's different between me as a female ombudsman and my male counterparts? Well, I would say it is probably the leadership style that I bring. I'm very much a hands-on leader. I do listen to people before I make up my mind. And I think that that my background as a female leader brings more humanity to the role. And that moves me on to the issue of human rights. You see, whether you're the classic ombudsman looking at maladministration, or you're looking at issues of police complaints, issues about prisons and prisoner complaints, or indeed issues about the health service, all such ombudsmen are, in my view, dealing with human rights issues, rights to health, access to information, issues about police corruption. Those are all matters that engage human rights. And in that respect, I have been working very closely with the International Ombudsman's Institute and the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission to produce an investigations manual. And that investigations manual reflects the human rights-based approach. It has been published by the IOI and has received international acclaim. I launched it in Bangkok at a World IOI conference, but it's very much a to-do manual. It's about bringing human rights principles of participation, non-discrimination and equality, empowerment, and ultimately, as an ombudsman, accountability in respect of human rights abuses.
Welcome, Joseph. Yeah. All right. Any comment on this? Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Sholai Femoluwanuga, private legal practitioner. The speaker area of play has to do with police ombudsman. There's something that is on in Abuja today, which personally I found interesting because having offered a discourse on media mediation, I kind of understood what was happening, and that is Human Rights Radio. Human Rights Radio, incidentally, I think it'll be here tomorrow. You know, it's something that has been so effective, you know, in conflict discourse, especially as it relates to police. It does other areas too. And what she said is quite interesting. I wouldn't know, like the Human Rights Radio, one thing I found out that has worked well for them, and I don't know whether it is here too, is the power of the media and the culture of the people. An African would not want his name to be mentioned all over. So he is more able to want to conform with what is being said than for his name to be mentioned in the media. He even prefers not going to the media. He prefers to go to court. And that has been what has worked well for the Human Rights Radio. I don't know whether that is the kind of thing. She says she makes a public statement. Is it a media related? Is it media annexed? Or is there something that really she does that makes hers very effective? And if there is it something that we can also maybe suggest to the Human Rights Radio here with us?
Incidentally, I think there are ombudsmen here. I wonder if they want to say something. The ombudsman of Ghana is here. David is here. Madame Angola. Yeah, because I think the question you are asking is really about the methodology of the ombudsman. Yes, you know, and whether that methodology is necessarily locked to a particular institution and not to the other. We want to say anything about that? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Professor. I think the whole issue of the methodology of the ombudsman is in my view, a fluid concept. You cannot say that for each institution there will be a particular package which applies and only that package will apply. Situations vary according to the different circumstances, the kinds of complaints that you have. If I can give our own experience, because back in Uganda, as far as doing the work of the National Ombudsman is concerned, we've had to look and become a bit more flexible in the approach, because it started with a fairly rigid sort of approach where, you know, you generate communications, you write letters to people expecting them to answer, and if they're not answering, you're issuing them with summons, official summons to come and respond in person. But we realized that that was not helpful. So we started to look a bit deeper and look at some of the alternative approaches that we could use. And in that respect, the colleague who was talking about mediation and conciliation, those are some of the techniques that we are looking at more deeply. And just also to comment a little bit on the whole idea of the specialty ombudsman and sector ombudsman practice. Again, from the Ugandan perspective, we are recognizing more and more, as an ombudsman office, we are overwhelmed. We are nowhere near the number of the population of Nigeria. You are, I think, over 200 million. In Uganda, we are about 40 million. But we are still incredibly overwhelmed. As I speak right now, in fact, when you talk about a scenario that is to do with universities, if you did a Google on Makerere University, that is our leading public institution. At the moment, there are ongoing riots over tuition. And you can see very clearly that some of these issues are being driven by a lack of avenues via which citizens can express themselves safely and securely. So we are looking at more and more developing circumstances where, you know, you can have these specialty ombudsman offices, not only for the sake of them being close to these people, but sometimes when you have those people who are dealing with those particular specialty areas, you find that it's easier for them because they have a narrower field in which they have to concentrate, as opposed to a national ombudsman now who has to be literally a jack of all trades. I have to intervene in the police, I have to intervene in the health sector, I have to intervene in any other sector, education sector, and simply the manpower and the capacity is not there. So in a nutshell, what I'm basically trying to say is that this whole ombudsman concept needs to be looked at more in a more open-minded kind of way, and not to look at it as a set of rigid circumstances under which the ombudsman executes the practice. It's very much fluid, and it's a developing area in my view, particularly in Africa. The Europeans and the Americans are a bit ahead of us, because when you check in their various jurisdictions, my colleague was just doing a Google search on the different ombudsman offices in the UK. They have practically an ombudsman for almost each and everything, which I think in a way is helpful in ensuring that, you know, you have a citizenry that is not as aggrieved as we tend to have on the African continent. Thank you.
Does that answer?
Right.
Yes, sir.
I didn't get the question clearly because I was having an aside with a colleague here. But just to indicate that, as he said, the ombudsman field is very fluid. It also depends on the legal framework of the country. Speaking about Ghana, you have an ombudsman that has practically, let me say, 4 broad mandates. Being an ombudsman, and at the same time being a Human Rights Commission, at the same time being an anti-corruption agency, at the same time being a Code of Conduct Bureau, as once we are in Nigeria. That is the closest example I can give. And so the framework gives some latitude, and you can, because it's one institution, you can use that latitude to cross into different fields. Why do I say that? Issues of mediation, conciliation, and let's say alternate dispute resolution is easier to be applied between the Human Rights Commission and then the Ombudsman. And so there is flexibility, because the framework doesn't say for this mandate, this is what you are supposed to do. It's a broad mandate with powers that allows you to exercise across the spectrum of the mandate. So for me, and speaking to the theme is on extending the frontiers of the Ombudsman. And Prof. Ayeni and I have been having, over the years, some discussions on how the Ombudsman can push itself beyond the classical model and begin to appreciate the situation in which hybrids become a very useful way of performing the function. Investigation should not be the only way. You should be able to have an alternative dispute resolution. You also have the power of public education. You should be able to let the public know their rights by way of the radio you mentioned. And I mean, you should be visibly almost in the eyes of the people. That is how you can become relevant. Now, since I walked in and saw Madam Anderson, it reminded me of an anecdote. I went to visit Northern Ireland when she was then the Deputy Ombudsman for Northern Ireland in 2010. And interestingly, I went to learn from her in terms of how the Ombudsman, Prof. Ayeni, at that time it was Tom Frawley who was the Ombudsman and she was the Deputy. And so I remember she asked me, but you have a human rights mandate as an Ombudsman. How are you able to perform that? And I said, oh, is it that you don't you use human rights principles in the determination of your complaints? He said, no. Because at that time, the courts had struck down any attempt by the Ombudsman to apply human rights principles. And so to see her in her new position as the Ombudsman, the Police Complaints Commissioner, and now professing knowledge of human rights principles and pushing for the human rights-based approach by the Ombudsman, I think she's come a long way. And that tells you, just consistent with the theme, that we should push the frontiers of the Ombudsman to the level to which we can make the institution relevant for the people in terms of what they need. If a complaint comes to us and we are only, as you said, structuralist, writing for comments, and just going through the processes without looking at to what extent the right of the person that has complained to you can be protected, and how innovative you can be in the way you will bring remedy. That is how I think the Ombudsman should begin to think of pushing forward. I will be doing a presentation tomorrow on the Ombudsman and its crucial role in human rights promotion and protection. Those of you who would be interested, you can always come to the parallel session where I would do further dilation on how the human rights-based approach can enhance the work of the Ombudsman and make the ombudsman's recommendations more acceptable, because we are simply applying standards that are entered into by the countries in which we operate. It makes it easier. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think also, just to add to the point you were saying, what we call media ombudsman is also a very relatively big growth area. They've been around for quite some time, and the Bereket, that's what you call it? Berekete, it's, yes, it's one that uses the radio. The earliest ones that we had in Nigeria actually were using press. And this goes back to, I don't know if any of you remember, Alaji Odunewu. Yes, this go back. I was myself a young kid then. So we've had them for years now. And essentially what it was then, which is similar to what we're having now, is that journalists will use, the fact that they have access to mass media to be able to bring up grievances and bring those concerns to those in authority. The advantage they have is the fact that they can't bring those things out and give it mass cover. And that's what makes it effective. That's why politicians don't like it. And in fact, even under the military, when we had military regimes, the so-called press and media ombudsmen were quite useful. But of course, what has happened is Berekete has taken it one step further. And it's also consistent with what the gentleman was saying earlier on when he talks about private sector. That's a typical private sector type ombudsman. And what really it is, it's not just that it's private sector, it's actually an informal one. Because nobody appointed him like that, nobody designated him like that, he just chose to do it. So it falls into this category of informal private sector. But you do also have, and I think the best example of them would be in the Scandinavia, where these are government-appointed, media ombudsman institutions. What is the essence of this? And I think that's the point that the colleagues have made. The ombudsman uses a whole range of different tools. Like any other institution, there are different tools that are in your arsenal. Your investigation, your use of mass media, your mediation, your ability to persuade, the personality of the ombudsman. So there is a whole range of tools. And one of them is the one that you've talked about. And we've always known that because the ombudsman is meant to be a largely persuasive institution, its ability to engage with public conscience is a very effective instrument. And this is also what Joseph has, in many ways, is developing further with the use of his human rights work. And I really would also encourage us to look at, to attend those sessions. The case of Uganda is one of the also very interesting one, because in Uganda, unlike, Joseph had the same mandate in Ghana because he has 3-4 different functions together. But one of the unique part of the Ugandan one is that it has a huge and prominent anti-corruption role. So it's essentially, picture it like this, the Nigerian. You combine ICPC, EFCC with PCC. You can only imagine what that will look like in this jurisdiction. And that's essentially the kind of thing that Uganda is dealing with. And that raises a whole range of different problems. Because the way ICPC does its things, the way EFCC do their thing, is different from the way PCC is meant to work. And that raises questions about how do you, maneuver the tightrope between these two different types of work. So it has made the ombudsman industry interesting. It has also presented a lot of challenges for those who have to run them. And this is, again, one of the things that we are trying to accomplish through this type of exposure. That people can, those who run this institution can see the different tools that they have and be able to utilize some of those tools. Every ombudsman institution, at the end of the day, must be able to use the media. So a good ombudsman institution would always have a good media department doing PR. And I think in your team, you have about 3 of your team members from Uganda who are actually media people. These are really just trained PR the guys. That's their job. And they work for the organization, trying to project it, trying to give it an image, and making sure that, you know, it's able to engage public conscience. You will see that also when you go to the booth of ICPC as well as EFCC. So that tool that Bereket is using is actually used in a different form by these different institutions. So yes, she does it, but what I think the Maria Anderson was talking about is really very much, which I think is unique to them, is the way in which they are combining the human rights function that Ghana talks about with the traditional investigation of the police. And the way they've combined that to ensure that they give police not just better public image, but also improve the relationship between the police and the citizenry is one of the outstanding parts of the Northern Ireland Police Ombudsman experience. Some of you will know that Northern Ireland was at war for many years, and they had a long history of conflict there and a lot of sectional tension. So having a good police ombudsman is important in calming people down and getting them to be committed to the political regime. And her role has been very crucial to maintaining peace in Northern Ireland and ensuring that Northern Ireland communities live as one. Ultimately, when members of society have problems, it's the security forces that, when they have a problem with government, the organization they have the biggest one with is often the security forces, because it's the police that the government will set on the citizen. And they usually would end up committing a lot of the atrocities. And having an ombudsman that can moderate that, particularly post-conflict, is really, Northern Ireland has been able to show us that is a very effective one. In my view, it also confirmed the point that I think colleagues have said, which is key to the whole idea of the frontiers, the fact that there are this range of options that we can have in improving citizens' life. It's not just about, yes, providing job is important, economic development is important, but ultimately, when you do not have institutions like this to create an atmosphere for these things to thrive, you never really get them. And this is why I think the United Kingdom put so much emphasis on the fact that you've got to find it. In the UK, every service provider must have a complaint handling instrument. It's a policy. If you don't have it, your entire business is illegitimate. So anytime I deal with a service provider, including my organization, I must present to you my complaint handling option. And my complaint handling option is in a hierarchy that enables my client to be able to end up with the ombudsman. And that is a right now. You know, in South Africa, they've taken it further to such, actually constitutionalizing it. So there has been significant progress in this area in recognizing, as Joseph said, that we cannot talk about the well-being of citizens if instruments like this are not readily available to them. I don't know who are the Yoruba speakers here. In those days, they used to have what they call Agbonodu in Lagos. Yes, this was also a bit like the Bereket. You know, Agbonodu is the one who sweetens, who brings solace to you. Yes. And this was a radio program, you know, in the 70s that Nigeria had, that was in Lagos primarily, as well as in what became in the western region that became, and then they also had, Lagos had a Leti Bairu, you know, the one who, Yeah, and then show, yes. Is it a good way to behave? So we've actually have a long culture of this. It's just that over the years, we've not really, tried to enhance them. Tomorrow, of course, we are having a dedicated session on the experience of Nigeria. And I will also encourage you in the breakaway group to come in and listen to the different options and what is being done and what we need to do to improve, what we have at the moment. And also appreciating the limitations of what we now have. Yes, sir.
Listening to fundamental human rights now,
Yeah,
I'm beginning to have a second.
He's a good marketer. That's the thing.
So, are we going to have an opportunity whereby people from those groups will give us a rundown of what happened at their group so that we can have one, four for the price of one?
Well, of course, you didn't pay for that, but anyway. No, what we are thinking, what we are doing is that because it's been live streamed, and we'll talk to Tokumbo about this again, you may be able to go back because it's all now recorded on YouTube. So after the event, you can go back and play whichever one you want. Yes. And we plan, of course, to pull all of that together. And my colleague were just telling me we put it on the IOE website. So for eternity, basically. So anytime you want to listen to any of the session, they will be there for you to download. And we're just talking about how we are going to do it. I think now that you are saying it, the more reason why we need to live stream every one of them. So I need to talk to them and know what arrangement they are having. Yes, I think that would be a more effective way. So you can be at home and just at your own. And also we think it's a training tool. People can use it also in their offices and play this for people to be able to listen to. So like all the videos that you've had, all of them will also be available in the link that we are providing. Yes. Okay, I think that, is there any other comments? I think the session was really to build on what we had in the morning and, of course, whet your appetite, ahead of tomorrow. And we hope that it has stimulated the appetite. We had thought that we could also spend some time, talking about particularly the investigative side. But because most of you here are not really ombudsman practitioners, we're thinking that the discussion around tools should probably just be sufficient for us at this stage. Because there's no point taking you into the technicalities of how the ombudsman is meant to handle complaints, investigate them, and all the rest of it. Because in itself, that's a specialized function for them. And there's quite a whole range of things that they need to do to be able to take a grievance and ensure that you get result with it. But in the course of tomorrow, people will have opportunity to hear from the different, sectors how they are doing things in terms of making things to happen. One final point I want to flag, which was important for us too, is that in all of this, and you saw that this morning, that the ombudsman is not only handling grievances, it's actually in many ways feeding to some of our critical Millennium Development Goals. And one of the most obvious one is, the goal on empowering girls and children. But of course, like in the case of Africa, the goal about trying to silence the gun and reduce conflicts and all the killing in the continent is an important part of it. So tomorrow, we plan there will be a session on the military and what ombudsmen can do in helping us to better manage and to better promote peace. One final one I want to draw attention to is a session on university ombudsmen. So we have a dedicated session tomorrow which will be discussing the options and the way these institutions are working and looking at what some of the ombudsmen do when they handle university grievances. you know, and we hope that that will be of interest also to some of our colleagues. So I want to wish you all a very good evening, and thank you for being part of this rather small, session. And we look forward to seeing you at the cultural night, and of course seeing you tomorrow, which is the grand finale. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.